This episode of Head Speaks is proudly sponsored by Sean Adams and Big Danny Cool. Welcome to the newest episode of Head Speaks, your home of all things geeky. I am your host, Aaron Brotherhead Moss. Let the show begin. Hey, dear listeners. Welcome to Head Speaks episode 84. No real preamble this time. Let's just get started with the episode. Welcome to Retrospective of the 80s. So last month when I spun the Wheel of Destiny, I came up with the year 1982. So let's get started looking at 1982. First, for Brotherhead, I was 12 years old in 1982. I don't have a lot of memories exactly from that year. I want to say that was probably the last year I worked as a paperboy. It's probably the year I got fired. I started working as a paperboy when I was like 9 or 10 years old. I've probably talked about this previously, but I come from a small little town called Chowchilla. Again, Chowchilla was like a one-horse town, like not quite literally, but we had more than one horse, but it was a small little town. So we didn't have a local newspaper when I was young. When about 9 or 10, the Madera Tribune, which is the next town over, we're in Madera County, they wanted to start a newspaper in Chowchilla called the Chowchilla News. It was like a weekly newspaper. It was daily. What was it? I was going to say it was weekly, but no, it was a daily newspaper. Anyways, they sent, had a bunch of kids come over and go out and get people to sign up for the newspaper. And again, as I've talked about before, growing up, I was a hell of a salesman. So when I got like the most people to sign up for the newspaper, I impressed the owner, the guy in charge, whoever it was. So he hired me. I was technically a bit too young for the job, but I was such a go-getter and a hard worker that he hired me on the spot to deliver newspapers. So I did that for a couple years. And then, like I said, it was about 1982, I want to say. Don't quote me on this. So this is my faulty memory, but I think it's what it was. Around that time, someone else, a friend, in quotes, friend of the family, took over the newspaper. And again, she said I was too young for it, so they let me go. Even though I'd been doing it for a couple years and didn't have any complaints, everyone loved me. I was, popular on my route. She said that she had too many complaints, in quotes, and that she had to let me go because I was too young for the job. I think it was 1982, if I'm not mistaken. Again, I could be wrong on that. It could have been 81, but anyways, 1982. Yeah, I did 12, so I was probably in 7th grade? 6th grade? 6th grade going to 7th grade, I want to say. So, yeah, I'm just doing the math in my head, and that's what I'm coming out with, so. Again, I was living in Chowchilla. This was before my brother passed away, so it was me, my mom, the boy, and my brother. By this time, we were living over on Calusa, the street I grew up on. And, not really much to say that I can't remember much about 1982 that really stands out, other than that was the year that we'll get to that in a little bit. So I'll hold off on that. So the top songs for 1982, the top 5 songs. The top one is Physical by Olivia Newton-John. Again, I knew her best from Grease. This was a few years later, but yeah, Physical by Olivia Newton-John was the number 1 song. Number 2 was Eye of the Tiger by Survivor. Number 3 was I Love Rock and Roll by Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. 4, Ebony and Ivory by Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder. And 5 is Centerfold by the J. Gills Band. In fact, I listen to an 80s music channel, like in the background at home all the time, and these songs, except for Ebony and Ivory, these other 4 songs are like in heavy rotation on the different music channels I watch from the 80s, so fantastic. I love all those songs. They're all great songs. The movies. This is the domestic box office for 1982, according to boxofficemojo.com. Let's start with number 5 movie. The number 5 movie was An Officer and Gentleman. Number 4 was On Golden Pond. Number 3, Rocky III. Very fitting. Number 2, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Great movie. I loved Raiders of the Lost Ark. In fact, I think that's the best Indiana Jones movie personally, but that's my own thoughts on it. I love the Atari video game. But that Raiders Lost Ark, and the number one movie, according to Box Office Mojo for 1982, was E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Fantastic. I loved E.T. I thought it was a great movie. In fact, I read the novel. In fact, there was a sequel to it, E.T. and the Green Planet or something like that. I forget what it was called exactly, but I remember reading that sequel later on. Fantastic. And I also want to give a special shout out to Megaforce, as Kevin refers to it as the G.I. Joe movie that wasn't a G.I. Joe movie. I had to mention Megaforce because if I didn't, I'm sure Kevin Reitzel, a.k.a. Raider Nerd, my fellow host over my G.I. Joe, a Real American Headcast, he would hunt me down and shoot me and drag me through the streets like a dog. So Megaforce came out in 1982. Moving on from there, there was rap. The top, these are the rap songs, or not songs, sorry about that, try that again. These are the rap albums that were released in 1982. Only 3 of them listing here. There may have been more, but these are the 3 that jump out at me. October the 3rd was Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5 and The Message. Great album, love that one. Curtis Blow, Tough. I'm not sure when that one came out. There wasn't a release date for that one. I don't remember that album offhand, but I love some Curtis Blow. I love these old school rappers. Fantastic. And also an unknown date was The Sequence with a self-titled album called The Sequence. Again, I mentioned rap because, again, I was a big rap fan. Toys that came out in 1982. My Little Pony. Again, this is from everything80sbodcast.com. Also, according to the Reader's Digest most popular toy in 1982 was the Glowworm. And as I was mentioning earlier, as far as personal life of Brother Head, this was the year I started watching something. That something would be G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe came out in 1982. Again, if you know me, you know that I'm a big fan of G.I. Joe. I do a podcast on it. I wear shirts. I have the toys. I've got, a lot of G.I. Joe, too much G.I. Joe stuff. But, I'm a big fan of G.I. Joe, and that came out in 1982. Again, it's owned and operated by Hasbro. Again, before 82, there was the 12-inch, in quotes, dolls, the larger G.I. Joe figures. And then that was like 1963, that first came out, and then it went away. And then in the 70s, it came back as something called the Adventure Team, which my friend Jim Beard is a big fan of that era of G.I. Joe. So he writes some books loosely based on that called DC Jones. It's basically his version of the Action Force Joes, but he's changed enough for copyright reasons, but great series of books. If you get a chance, check out Jim Beard's DC Jones on Amazon.com. But in 1982, we had G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero. Again, this was a 3.75-inch figure. It was the same size as the Star Wars from over at Kenner's, but had many more points of articulation, much like, as it says here, the 1970s Megos Micronaut toy line. Again, this here, when they relaunched it, and again, I've talked about this all the time over my G.I. Joe podcast, but I'm going to talk about it here a little bit more. They launched it, and they wanted to have a comic book to go along with it, to appeal, to kids, and to get them into the toys, they wanted to have a comic book. So they went to Marvel, and story goes, they asked a lot of different writers, no one wanted to do it. It came across Larry's desk, and Larry said, you know what, at this point, I'd be willing to write, just to get some work, I'd be willing to write Barbie. And he was a military man himself, so ex-military. So he had the experience. He was a great writer. So Larry Hama took up G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, and made it a fantastic book. As me and the guys talk about over my G.I. Joe podcast, in the mid to late 80s, G.I. Joe was like on fire. It had like a bunch of different books out, different titles out, and it was like one of Marvel's top sellers. So, but let's go and talk a little more about G.I. Joe. And that's what I'm going to spend the rest of this episode of 1982, or at least this segment for 1982 on Retrospective of the 80s, talking about some G.I. Joe. Because again, as I said, I love me some G.I. Joe. I'm pulling most of this information from Wikipedia, so I know I've talked about this on my main show, but let's go and talk about it here. So before G.I. Joe came along, the relaunch in 1982, Larry Hama was working on a book or an idea for Marvel called Nick Fury, was called Fury Force, actually. It was basically the son of Nick Fury putting together an elite team of commandos to battle neo-Nazis, the Hydra. For whatever reason, they didn't pick it up, or it wasn't pitched yet, and that's when editor-in-chief Jim Shooter approached Larry Hama about the G.I. Joe project, because again, as I said, Larry had a military background, and he's a fantastic writer. Well, he may not have been and I don't want to say this the wrong way, but he may not have been I forget now how long he was in his writing career, so I'm not sure if he was known as a fantastic writer at this point. But again, they approached him, and he took his Fury Force idea and co-opted and changed it into something that would work for G.I. Joe. And apparently they had the toys, they had the main figures set out, like 10, 12 figures, or whatever it was. And they're like, well, who are they going to fight? Because again, the Fury Force is going to fight Hydra. So again, rumor has it that Archie Goodwin, a writer, editor at Marvel, he came with the idea of Cobra and Cobra Commander to be the nemesis for G.I. Joe. Apparently Hasbro, according to this, at least on Wikipedia, Hasbro was initially uncertain about making villain toys, believing they would not sell. I don't know why. I know, like the Clash of the Titans, I had the Calabac, I think his name was, the bad guy there. You have to have bad guys for your heroes to fight. Come on, Hasbro. Apparently also Marvel, and I don't know how much it was Marvel and how much of it was Larry directly, but they included female G.I. Joes in the line. And again, back in the day, toy companies were afraid that boys wouldn't buy female toys or female action figures. So they didn't really have a whole lot of action figures, female action figures. They had one in the first line, which was Scarlet's. Again, it's the original 13, so it was 13 characters in the original lineup, and one of them was Scarlet. So, and as me and the guys talk about, Larry, while there was some missteps here and there, which I'm not getting into here, Larry was very inclusive. I mean, one of the main, again, I don't know if this was Hasbro that came with the toy or Larry that came with the idea, but one of the main characters was Stalker, which was a black guy, which again, for the early 80s was, kind of a step, forward. Had Scarlet as a female character, and Larry would have a bunch of different nationalities and races, and both male and female in the G.I. Joe comics. So it was also, apparently Larry was responsible he wrote most of the file cards. One of the exceptions, if I'm not mistaken, was, I want to say, story has it that the character, again, several years down the road, Crystal Ball, supposedly Stephen King wrote that character, file card. But, and that's one great thing about the toys. Yeah, the figures came with a figure, came with a weapon or two, or backpack, different things, accessories. And on the back of the package, they had a file card with the character's, name, birthplace, rank, a few other things, their specialties. Had a little brief bio on them, and then had like a little quote from somebody about the character, which again, and that's one thing I've complained about over my G.I. Joe show is, and over on also on my live streams I do the third Friday of the month, when I open up my, my toys I've got, the new classified line they're doing, they don't have the character file cards, which I miss. I like the file cards. I know on the in quotes, retro figures, and the smaller, when they came out the O-ring, they had some retro G.I. Joe figures. They had a file card on there, but it was a very reduced. It wasn't quite what it was before, because now they're trying to do like 5 different languages to appease a bunch of different people. I don't like that. I like the original file cards, but I'm digressing. And apparently they decided that the comic book series itself would be advertisement for the television show, as opposed to advertising for the toys directly. Because again, at the time, TV advertising for toys was subject to strict regulations. They could only show so much animation for a toy. Whereas a cartoon, you could advertise, in the comic book, you could advertise as much animation as you wanted to. So they had the cartoon and the comic book both to kind of help sell the toys, to get around the marketing. Well, we can't have very much animation to sell these toys. Let's do a cartoon. Let's do a comic book, and we can, push this out. And I think it really worked well, because again, as I said, by the mid 80s, G.I. Joe was one of Marvel's top sellers. So It was fantastic. Again, according to Wikipedia here, every year Hasbro and Marvel would team up or meet up to discuss the upcoming toys and marketing. Larry Hama was given a free rein by Marvel's editors. Again, I would put that in quotes, but we'll get, or actually, I guess Marvel's editors, they were a free rein, but again, Hasbro would kind of, dictate what characters need to go, what toys, as I've talked about in the show, they'd have a bunch of new toys come out, so Larry'd have to push them to the comic. Which, as we talk about, he did a great job in getting these toys introduced into the comic for the most part. Every once in a while there'd be a clunker here and there, but for the most part, he was able to get these new toys out to the kids through the comic, and it came out rather naturally. Again, like I say, G.I. Joe lasted until 1994, when apparently Hasbro transferred control of them to the newly acquired Kenner division, which canceled G.I. Joe, the Real American Hero toy line, and they replaced it with G.I. Joe Extreme, because it was the 90s, and in the 90s, everything was extreme, which I didn't care so much for. But anyways, again, I was a bit older then. I was 24 when that came out, and I missed Larry Hama's Real American Hero. They did eventually bring the Real American Hero comic book back through a couple of different, I think it was IDW, brought it back, and now it's being published by Images. One of their offshoot companies is now currently producing the G.I. Joe Real American Hero comic book. Currently, there's no cartoon. And as far as toys, there's mainly the G.I. Joe classified figures, which is a pain in the ass to find if you don't get them from Hasbro directly. Occasionally, you find them at Target. I can never find them at Walmart anymore. And once in a great while, you can find them on sale at a cheap price at Ross. But again, I don't see them very often there either. So, but G.I. Joe, originally, like I said, there was 13 figures originally. The original series, their arms were straight. And then in 1983, they changed it with the second series to what they called the swivel arm, which allowed the forearm to rotate above the elbow. Where originally it could only bend at the elbow, now it can rotate also. So the original figures, really, I said they were a little plain, not plain so much, but they were mostly all military, grays, and looked very much military, except for, like I said, there was Scarlet, which was the female on the team, and then there was Snake Eyes, which was all decked out in black because it was easy to do that figure. And again, they would go on to do play vehicles and play sets, and it was a big line. Again, looking at Hasbro's website, the Wikipedia on G.I. Joe, the file card that I talked about. Again, like I said here, the file card was something where you could cut it out, pull the figure off the package, then you cut the file card out and save it. I remember I used to have mine like in an old little recipe box. I kept mine in. But on each of them, there was a picture of the character, indication of allegiance, whether they were G.I. Joe, Cobra, eventually they do Dreadnoks and other groups. The code name, their function, their file name, which is their real name, the serial number, their primary and secondary military specialties, their birthplace, their rank grade. And then, as I talked about, there was a paragraph detailing the background of the character, such as education, upbringing, and training, and then a quote from an unidentified source, usually giving the owner an idea of the character's personality. And I like the file cards. Originally, they were kind of, especially the paragraph detailing their background, was for the most part pretty vanilla, pretty just straightforward. And as the figure started coming out, Larry started getting more, I guess in quotes, creative with it, and he started doing more into it and giving a little more character to a lot of the file cards, which was fantastic. And they did that for both the Joes and the Cobras or Dreadnoks, which is the bad guys. And yeah, it says here, for the first 8 or so years, the file cards written primarily by Larry Hama. So apparently, how these started was Larry did a dossier on each of the characters to make it easier for him to write the characters. And someone at Hasbro saw these dossiers and figured they'd be a great addition to the toy to help sell the toy. So, and yeah, again, as it says here, the file card information will later be reprinted in the G.I. Joe comic book miniseries called The Order of Battle, which I should be covering soonish somewhat over on my G.I. Joe, a Royal American Headcast. It had new art by Herb Trimpe. Herb was the artist for the G.I. Joe comic book. Fantastic artist that fit very well with what Larry was doing as far as the writing goes. So, And again, the file cards and the toys went on. I'm not going to get further into it because, again, we're getting beyond 1982. But again, I can talk for a long time on G.I. Joe just because, again, I'm such a big fan of it. And that's why I do a monthly podcast on it. So again, the toy line, there was 11 characters originally introduced. Let me see. There was 11 characters, according to Wikipedia. The first 11 characters were introduced in carded packs, while 4 others were bundled with vehicles. And again, see, they're saying that there was vehicles. I don't think there's vehicles in the first run of G.I. Joe. I was just checking real quick. One good place to go is yojo.com. It lists all the action figures and vehicles and all that. So yeah, 1982, I'm just double checking because I guess there was vehicles in the first series. So yeah, there was 11 figures originally in the first line. And then there was 4 vehicle drivers, and there was a mail away where you could get Cobra Commander, the leader of Cobra. And like I said, originally they were all very militaristic looking. The Cobras there was 2 Cobra soldiers, a Cobra soldier and a Cobra officer, just plain blue uniforms with the Cobra logo, helmets. And then the Joes themselves were all, military, or was olive drab green or whatever, except for Scarlet was a little bit different because she had the green bodysuit or whatever on with a grayish or tan padding in the front. I forget what it was called. It was Stalker, which was in camo gear, and then Snake Eyes was totally in black. And then as the series would go on, the characters would get more colorful, have their own personality, to be able to tell them the difference. Because if they were all in the military uniforms, it'd be hard to tell who they are. So again, you wanted to sell these toys, so they would start making them more colorful, more expressive. And I think at a certain point they went too far with it. But again, that's another story entirely for a different complaint. Like I said, there was 4 vehicles. Apparently there was Clutch, which came with the Vamp. There was Stiller that came out in the HAL, which is the heavy artillery laser. There was Hawk, originally came out with the mobile missile system, the MMS. And then there was Stiller, which came in the Mobat. And see, a lot of people refer to this first line as the original 13. But in figures, there was 11 regular figures, plus the 4 vehicle drivers, and then the mail-in Cobra Commander. So it was actually more than 13. I'm not sure where that 13 number comes from. But again, 1983, which I talked about last month, we started getting a little more colorful. We got Destro with a silver helmet. We got Gung Ho, which had camouflage pants and just a vest with his Marine, whatever, tattoo on his chest. And again, at this point, they're still mostly military looking. I mean, some of the more, in quotes, outrageous, like I say, it's Destro, of course. But then there was Wild Bill, which was in a brown uniform with a Western-style hat on. And then it looks like I would say, 1984 is when they start, I think, to get a little more. That's when they bring in Spirit and Storm Shadow, which is the ninja. And then in 85, we start to get, even more, in quotes, outrageous, more, unique characters, if you will. But again, I'm getting outside of 1982. I got to watch that because, again, I have a problem with going on tangents and going and just talking about G.I. Joe and forgetting where I'm at. So again, the toys came out in 1982. It looks like the cartoon didn't start until 1983. Well, I think that's when the main series. Let me check real quick, Wikipedia. I guess, the first miniseries came out in 1983, which, again, I talked about last month, so we'll talk about that briefly because it's part of G.I. Joe. There was a 5-episode series called The Mass Device, which introduced G.I. Joe in 1983. In 1984, there was a second miniseries called The Revenge of Cobra. And then 1985 is when the cartoon actually got started going with another 5-issue miniseries called The Pyramid of Darkness, which led directly into the new series. It was on every weekday, Monday through Friday. And the original series, there was 2 seasons of it. The first season ran 55 episodes. And then there was a season 2, which was a bit shorter. It only ran 30 episodes. Then they had G.I. Joe the movie. And then, again, I talked to Buzz Dixon, one of the main head writers on the G.I. Joe cartoon. And apparently, kind of like a last minute type thing, Hasbro decided to pull the plug with Sunbow, and they gave the cartoon over to a company called DIC. And as I've talked about, I say in 1989, there was a 5-episode series called Operation Dragonfire. And then in 91, there was the new season 1, they're calling it, of the DiC series. And again, it lasted 2 seasons. The first season had 19, and the second season had 20 episodes. And I've only seen the original DiC series, Operation Dragonfire, because again, in 1990, I'd moved out of my mom's house by that point. I was, and somehow I missed it. I thought it was off the air. I didn't realize it was still going. I don't know if my local TV stations didn't have it, or if just somewhere along the way with, being on my own and working and what have you, if I just missed it. So I never did catch this DiC series beyond the original Operation Dragonfire miniseries. I've got them on DVD, and I will watch them at some points. But over my G.I. Joe show, I'm covering, like I said, the comic and the cartoon. So I figure at this point, I'll wait till I get there in broadcast order and then watch them then and watch it. Because from what I'm hearing from a lot of people, that may be my best bet, because it wasn't as good as the original series. They changed a lot of the voice actors. The animation maybe not been quite as good. We'll see. But and again, by that point, I say by 1990, I graduated high school in 88. I went to a year of college from 88 and 89. So yeah, in like September of 89, I'd moved out of my mom's house. So I'd stopped buying the toys. In fact, I sold what collection I had. Again, I regret that to this day, but I ended up selling my collection. So yeah, I didn't get anything after that for the most part. I didn't really see, G.I. Joe was kind of off my radar for a while, except for the comic. I was still buying the comic, but the cartoon, again, I missed, and the toys, I was out of the loop on at that point. And I missed the Day Glow and all the other changes they made to G.I. Joe, which probably is for the best. But again, that's my own thoughts on it. But G.I. Joe. Yeah, like I say, I could talk for a while, but again, I would start going on more than just 1982. So we're going to wrap that up here. It's been about half an hour almost. We're going to go end this with Retrospective of the 80s with 1982 right here. And just trying to think, I think this is going to be a short episode. I was going to do a segment of After Movies of Head. The wife and I, again, she's a big fan of Labyrinth. And so we watched that, and we were going to talk about that, and we recorded like an hour-long episode that I was going to play here, but she wasn't happy with what came out of it. We kind of jumped around here and there, and I explained, well, it happens. That's the way I do things. But she's not happy, so I was trying to edit it down, and she was complaining that she just liked the way it was coming out. So we're going to probably re-record that, so I'll play that on a future episode. Like I've said previously, I'm trying to free up some time to do some recordings. I'm going to start looking at the Animal Man series by, I think it was Grant Morrison, at least the first 26 issues, and then Grant left and some other guys took it on. It was still a good series, but it wasn't what Grant was doing. And it started getting more weird, and eventually it went to the Vertigo line because it was the weird and more fringy stuff that DC was doing. So soon, watch for it. I will be doing the Animal Man series. But thank you for listening. Like I said, this could be a short episode this time. Check out my other works. I'm going to be working on the last episode of the Starman Adventure Show. I'm looking at the last 2 issues of Starman, plus where he went from there. That should be coming out in 2 weeks from this point, as long as I can stay on topic or stay on track. Also, I've got Task Force X, which is actually going to be ending in the next couple of months. I am working on the last few episodes of that. Currently, my other podcast with Michelle, the Starbright Project, is currently on hold. Again, we kind of put it on hold because the band, my daughter's in band, and my wife is a band booster. She's actually the president of the band boosters, so we got busy doing band stuff, so we kind of put that on hold. And we're trying to refigure and figure what we're doing on the show. I've talked about this before. I'm not going to go to it here, but watch for more news on the Starbright Project. And then, of course, I got my other main show. My main shows are Head Speaks and then G.I. Joe, Royal American Headcast. That comes out 3 times a month. The main show is where I look at the G.I. Joe comics and the cartoon from the late 80s or through the 80s, early 90s, as I just talked about. The second part of that show is Bravo Team, where I look at everything else G.I. Joe related. Right now I'm looking at the special missions, which once in a while tie into the book, and also trying to fit in some order of battles, as I talked about earlier. And then the third part of that show is the Energon Protocols. Again, Renegade Studios has released a G.I. Joe role-playing game. An online buddy of mine, Eric Smith, has got me and a couple of other guys together, and we're playing the game, and I'm recording it and releasing this podcast episodes. So check those all out. That's all available at the Headcast Network at headcast.headspeaks.com. Check it out. It's also wherever available wherever fine podcasts can be downloaded. If you like what you're doing, if you like what you're hearing here, check us out on Patreon. There's patreon.com/Headcast Network. Speaking of Patreon, I do want to give thanks to my sponsors over there. I have Bill Bear and Cosplay Dad. Also, the big spinners over there, as I mentioned at the top of the show, is Sean Adams and Big Danny Cool. Once again, thank you guys very much for sponsoring me and for throwing a few bucks to the tin. Doesn't do a whole lot. It's not a whole lot, but every little bit helps. That's what I'm trying to say. And there's also some free members on there. In fact, I'll go ahead and give their shout out also. There's Brian Welbler, a buddy of mine, Gene Hendricks, Heinz Koch, who's a big supporter of my G.I. Joe show. He's always over on the live stream I do, which I'll mention in just a minute. Henry Self, it looks like, are all free members. There's also, Mark Ross, a.k.a. Cluck Trent, and Michael Minton. So I want to thank you guys all very much for showing some support. But a big special thanks to both Big Danny Cool and Sean Adams. And as I was saying, on the third Friday of the month, I have my live stream over on youtube.com. Again, that is available at youtube.com/@g.i.joe_headcast. And again, the G-I-J and the H is all capital letters. That is where I do, and that's also on Headspeaks, which is at youtube.com/@headspeaks. So go ahead and check that out. And again, my YouTube channels, normally the fourth Sunday of the month, I do my live recordings of my G.I. Joe shows. So check those out. Join us there the fourth Sunday of the month. Both streams are at 1 o'clock p.m. Pacific time. But honestly, where I'm at now, it's getting late. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. So we're going to end this show now. Again, I want to thank you guys very much. And you guys have a good night. Until next time, remember, Head has spoken. Thank you for joining us on another great episode of Head Speaks. I can also be found rambling on other Headcast Network shows, such as the Task Force X Headcast, where I cover all the appearances of the Suicide Squad and Checkmate comic books from the late 80s, early 90s, over on G.I. Joe, a Real American Headcast, where me and my guest hosts look back at the comic book and TV series from the 80s. And in addition, we also have Bravo Team, where we look at other G.I. Joe related paraphernalia. And over on the Starman Adventure Show, where I reread the Will Payton Starman comics and talk about them, once again, from the late 80s. In addition, myself and my wife Michelle, along with our friend from the land down under, Hayden McQueenie, talks about the TV show Quantum Leap monthly over on the Starbright Project. All the Headcast Network shows can be found on your favorite podcatcher or at my home on the internet, which is at headcast.headspeaks.com. Over on Facebook, X, and Instagram, look for Headcast Network. And please feel free to email your bitches, moans, and gripes to head@headspeaks.com. Also, feel free to email any compliments you have. If you want to record a message, you can send it to me at head@headspeaks.com, and I'll play it on the air. And be sure to join us next time for another fun-filled headcast from your friendly neighborhood brother Head. And be sure to tell a friend. Until next time, I'll see you in the funny pages.